Hello and welcome everyone to Origina's webinar discussing Gartner's latest market guide on third-party software maintenance for SAP, Oracle and IBM software. So on this webinar is going to be myself and Brendan. So we're going to kick it off now. We're getting a few people coming in and they'll continue, but let's not delay it any further. Let's go for it. So we have, this has been quite a popular webinar today. So we have about 70 people signing up for this, interested in knowing more about the third-party market, but also what it can do, what's the value this adds.
Yeah, perfect, Sinead. Looking forward to it. So it's been quite a journey. We've been waiting for this guide for a while now from Gartner to come out, and I think this webinar will reflect things we've read in the guide, but also our own kind of personal views on the topic and what we've heard from the market. So
yeah, every point in this guide has hit home with us, true on what we're hearing, how the market is evolving, and why people are switching to third-party maintenance.
Yeah, for sure.
So basically, if you didn't know, Gartner released this guide on the 10th of September, and it's actually their first ever guide they've produced on the independent third-party maintenance market. And you would notice that actually there is no mention of Microsoft, and that's actually because there is no identified third-party maintainer for Microsoft at the moment, but maybe in the future there might be. But pretty much the outline of this market guide and the value it can bring to you really is what is third-party software support and who are the providers, and when third-party support may or may not be an option for your organization. So third-party support isn't for everyone, and this outlines what you have to look out for to see if it is right for you, the benefits and risks in switching to third-party support. Like with switching any vendor, you have to do your risk and benefit analysis. And then finally, the steps to validate the right third-party supplier. So you figured out, yes, third-party support is for you, you've done the benefit and risk analysis, and now you're like, okay, I'm going to pick a provider. Gartner do a great analysis within the report detailing the steps you should do when validating. So I'll just briefly explain who actually created this market guide and why. So this market guide was created by three of Gartner's top software vendor analysts. So you have Chris Dixon, who is a specialist in software and cloud contract negotiation, software audits, and IT asset disposition. His particular area of expertise is IBM. And then you actually have the amazing Joanne Rosenberger, who has years of experience in negotiating, but also putting together customized financial models, which will detail what is the cost impact a vendor has, both long-term and short-term in your organization, and seeing what ways you can bring down these software costs in the short and long term. And then you have Rob Wilkes, and he is an expert in negotiation strategies and specializes in Oracle. Now, these are the guys you go to if you have questions on anything to do with SAP, Oracle, or IBM software. How do you negotiate with the vendors? How do you get your best contract? So as you this is other research they've actually produced. I'd recommend checking out this research. If you've ever been to one of the Gartner IT procurement conferences, definitely sit in on their presentations next time. You will always walk away with valuable information.
Yeah, for sure. I was at the last two Gartner software vendor procurement and asset management conferences, the one in Dallas and the more recent one in the UK, and they were both fantastic. And didn't get to see Chris, unfortunately, but I saw Joanne Rosenberger's SAVE methodology presentation, and I saw Rob Wilkes' presentation, How to Reduce Your Software Maintenance Costs, and they are excellent. They're very well delivered. A lot of content and a lot of handouts, particularly with Joanne. She likes her handouts. So, so very valuable content. If you haven't been to one of those conferences before, it's definitely worth going the next time.
So the question is, why did they produce this report? And actually, it's really simple. So software maintenance costs are escalating, and the sourcing, procurement, and vendor management leaders have to figure out new ways of maximizing their restricted budgets. And they're looking at third party as a viable option. So these analysts are getting questions, on a weekly basis on, how do I optimize and is third party an option? So they created this guide to act as a navigation tool in figuring out if third party is for you and how do you get it right in choosing the right third party for your organization, because it's a switch. So because they're seeing the increase in demand of questions, they're also seeing the TPSM market, which is the third party software maintainers market, is fast growing because software asset managers, they have to maximize those budgets. But they have cloud migration projects happening. They have other IT, costs pulling at them. So the TPSM market is growing 33% every year. If you don't know about Gartner's IT metrics summary they release every year, this year's one shows that software is the second highest IT spend category in organizations. So if you can find ways to maximize that spend, you can actually divert that money into other projects that are meaningful. Another reason why this market is fast growing is, you save 50% straight off. And the way Gartner's 2018 Sourcing, Procurement and Vendor Management Survey found that 1 in every 2 organizations measure direct cost savings as the success and value of the IT procurement team. So the end of the review happens. Well, one of our 2 your checkboxes is, have you made significant savings? And actually, third-party software maintenance is a bit of an easy win if you can cut such a huge spend, because if you have a look at your Oracle, your SAP, and your IBM software support costs, they can run from the hundreds of thousands into the millions. And if you can cut that by half, that is a significant savings that you can have.
Yeah. I met a guy at the last Gartner conference, and I knew him to be a procurement professional, and I said to him, so what is it you do again? I won't mention his name for confidentiality reasons, but he said, oh yeah, I'm in cost management and procurement. But he started with cost management and procurement, although his main job title, main role is procurement. But that was his new, his new responsibility. It wasn't just about buying, it was about actually trying to find savings. So there you go, quite interesting.
So if any of you had explored the third-party software providers, you will know that Oracle is Spinnaker Support, Rimley Street, Support Revolution, and Alloy. If you want IBM, it's just us Origina. And for SAP, it is Spinnaker, Rimley Street, and Support Revolution. So within Gartner's market guide, they detail what exactly these guys cover, what geographies, and what percentage geography cover they have. Most of them tend to be global providers, but the market guide will actually show you the evaluation. So again, it doesn't even just show you why to switch, how to switch. It details who are the suppliers. It gives you a summary of what they do and the value of service they provide. So really, it's a very valuable market guide.
This side also highlights the fact that there's no Microsoft provider, as you mentioned earlier, but we expect that to change. We expect that this group of vendors will expand, and Microsoft will probably come into the fold as well at some point in the future.
Yeah, it's only a matter of time. The third-party maintenance market is just over 10 years old, and there's, providers will come on board, and it's really just vetting those providers to see will they be there long term, first of all, if you sign up for them, but also what will be the quality of service, because it's not just about cost savings, it's about the right move for your organization.
Yeah. Interesting enough, in the Microsoft world, you see a lot of relicensers. So there's companies out there who do discount licensing and relicensing, and that's mostly about Microsoft. So they're not necessarily in the TPSM space, but they are in the second-hand license market. So that's actually another very fast-growing market for finding ways to reduce costs as well.
No, for sure. So these are the TPSM providers. So what are the core findings of the report? So basically what Gartner is telling you is you should always explore third-party maintenance because there is significant cost savings. And if you don't explore it, you're just leaving it on the table. You have to at least look at it as an option, because if you can save 50% off a $100,000 to $1 million contract yearly, why would you not explore it? But it's not as easy as that. You have to do your research. you have to make sure that it is the right fit for your organization. And to do that involves a lot of stakeholder management, cost analysis, and impact, both short-term and long-term. And then once you've done all that internal analysis, you have to make sure you pick the right vendor, the right software maintainer. And when you decide on your third-party provider, you really have to push the limit of if they can support the way you want them to support you. This goes down to technical calls, asking for demos. Maybe they might do a trial, and actually getting live client references. Don't just listen to the supplier. Make sure you can get some of their clients on board, get them on a call and have long chats with them, because it's a big decision. You want to make sure it's the right one. So I've given you kind of a brief of what to expect from the Gartner Market Guide, and Brendan's going to actually talk about it more in detail and actually throw in some live references he's come across while working within Origina.
I'll try and do that while not name dropping too much.
Try, please.
Do my best. So, yeah, I'm going to bring you through a number of sections now, and just want to highlight while you're on the webinar, if you want to ask any questions, keep the questions coming in. I think a couple of questions have come in so far, but keep the questions coming, and we'll address those at the end. So some interesting questions, I think, there so far. So we're going to start with the first slide here. It's the main reasons organizations look to the third-party software maintenance world. So the headline, I suppose, item here is about cost and about budget. So if you read the guide, or and based on your own experience, you'll probably understand that organizations are under pressure in relation to cost. They're looking to drive down the cost of that headline item Sinead referred to, which is the software spend. And one, I guess, very clear way of identifying costs and reducing it is to look at the TPSM market. Reportedly, and with their own experience here in Origina, savings of 50% minimum can be achieved by switching to a TPSM from the OEM vendor. In some cases, that can be higher depending on the types of spend that you have, and we'll come back to that later. And these become annual savings, and because of the comparison with the OEM vendor over time, the compounded savings increment year on year. So it's certainly worth looking at and doing your analysis. The other reason is flexibility in terms of contracts. So what I mean by flexibility here is organizations are paying IBM, SAP, and Oracle for support and also for future software upgrades, sometimes referred to as subscriptions. So in IBM world, it's subscription and support. So part of that fee, which can be quite high, and it is escalating in relation to the support that you get, and a good portion of it is in relation to future upgrades. So if the organization is needing support, but not necessarily needing to pay for future upgrades of software, they're happy with the version that they're on, and the version that they're on does what they need and meets the business requirements, well then flexibility can be provided by the TPSM, who can provide you the support that you need, but without you having to pay excessive amounts of money for software versions and enhancements that you may not actually need. So flexibility is certainly a key thing that we hear from in the market. The other item is looking for an enhanced level of support. I mean, when I talk to clients today, the first thing I ask people is, are you happy? Are you happy with the support that you're getting? So it's not always about, are you happy with how much you're spending? Because I know the answer to that. It's, are you happy with the level of support that you're getting? And invariably the answer is, well, actually, no, I'm not happy. So I'm looking for an enhanced level of support. I'm looking for enhanced SLAs. I'm looking for an organization that will support my custom code. I'm looking for advice and guidance. I've got an upgrade coming up. I want to be able to call my vendor without having to pay them consultancy fees. So these are in the OEM world may seem as enhanced level of support, but in the TPSM world, it's just support. It's enhanced out of the box. So there are the reasons. I guess that in line with budget costs and savings are combined. They're probably the two key things. The fourth one here is about shorter term contracts. So some organizations get trapped into long-term, 3-year, 5-year ELAs and EULAs, And when they're coming out of those contracts, they don't necessarily want to renew for the same length of time. They may want the flexibility to renew on a very short-term engagements, because the products that they're using are going to become not just end of life with the vendor, but actually they're not going to be using the products into the future. They're migrating to the cloud and so forth. So they're looking for potentially shorter-term contracts, maybe just 12 months, and maybe even shorter. So those are the key reasons why people switch. So the next slide then really is about why. Why are organizations doing this? So what is happening in the organization that triggers an investigation? So clearly there's, why we want to justify it with cost savings, but what's happening in the organization environment that I suppose triggers this response? So here's the five key reasons that we see and that Gartner would also concur with are, so number one we see is cloud migrations. Everybody's moving to the cloud. Cloud is a big discussion topic. So whether you're using analytical products or middleware tools, moving to the cloud is obviously a big topic. So when moving to the cloud, companies often ask us, well, can I continue to use the software that I have at the moment that is currently serving my needs while this cloud migration goes ahead? And the answer, of course, is predominantly yes. It depends, of course, on the type of the software that you're using. Is it perpetually licensed? If you have perpetually licensed software, you can continue to use it in perpetuity. In fact, if you download the software that you're entitled to, the latest versions, you can even upgrade during a cloud migration period to a later version of the software. So cloud migration can be a good trigger for you to investigate, are there options for cost saving during the cloud migration process. Another obvious one then is, well, I'm not migrating to the cloud, but I'm actually going to be migrating to a new vendor product. I'm going to keep it on premise, but I'm moving from security product A and I'm considering security product B. Well, during that process of decisioning as to which product to move to, and when you're doing that analysis, of course, the same rules apply in terms of the product that you still have, whether it's from IBM, SAP, or Oracle. It's, can I continue to use the software that I have while I do this migration? And the answer, again, is typically, of course, you can, but you need to look at the license. Is it perpetual? Kind of the same rules apply. The third option here is, and this is something we do with our clients all the time, Sinead, we always look at, well, what's the value that you're getting from the contract that you have? And how do you determine value? Well, it's about, that question I said earlier. Do you feel you're getting the value from the contract? Are you happy with the current contract? The easiest place that I tend to direct people to, this is an IBM terminology, but it's the PMR history or the case history. How many tickets are you logging? How many have you logged in the last 12 months? What is the severity of those tickets? How long have those been tickets open? How many of them are there? And you'd be surprised, and I'm always very surprised at, I guess, what would be the per ticket cost for the tickets that are raised against the amount of money that's been paid on a per product basis. And it's actually quite staggering sometimes.
I always find this quite interesting when you're telling me, to be honest. What's the highest cost per ticket you've come across?
It's a good question, and I think the highest I've seen in the last 12 months was for, I better not mention the product, but it is an IBM product, it's a middleware product, a messaging product, and the cost per ticket was $500,000. So the client was paying almost $1 million in maintenance, and they had raised 2 tickets on this particular product in the last 12 months, neither of which needed an update or a patch. Both were easily addressable through configuration change, or in fact one of them was a query.
And when you talk about the low value of the maintenance, it's not just about cost, it's actually about tickets outstanding. So this is another thing to look at why switching occurs. If it's a bug or an issue of the software that's not on an FAQ, it's harder for it to be fixed by the bigger vendors. So the tickets could be outstanding for 2 or 3 months or longer.
Or longer, yeah. I mean, 2 or 3 months would be a good average from what I've seen in the last recent times. So those key things, like how long are the tickets open, how many do I really have, and am I getting value for money? So those things are key. The other thing is in tandem with low value is what else are you getting for the service? Like, are you getting consultancy services? Are you getting service relating to the custom code? Are you able to ask as many how-to questions? Are you able to ask for advice and guidance in relation to upgrades? If the answer to that is no, well then you're not getting value for money, and it's a low-value maintenance contract, right? So The next one is interesting. Not many people really get this, but during the contract period with the vendors, a product may become end of service. So end of support, end of service, end of life. Basically, during this period of time, the vendor, whether it's IBM, SAP, or Oracle, will not support the product any longer until you do one of two things. You either upgrade, which can be a very costly exercise in itself, or you pay additional money to get the support that you expected to get in the first case, right? Mm-hmm. So end of support, this is sometimes called a service extension. It could be called enhanced support or extended support, I should say. So these can be quite high fees in themselves. They can be almost as much as the support fee you're already paying. And so, looking at the TPSM market for an alternative provider of products to support products that are end of support or end of life is important.
Does that mean that's not just 50% savings then, if they're paying?
If you're paying already 100%, for example, for the maintenance, you could be paying another 100% for extended support. If you dropped the support from the primary vendor entirely, overall you could be saving not just 50%. Actually, it could be 100% difference. So, but that's vendor to vendor. It depends on how much they actually charge for that support, that end support. How do you know how much that is? But the only way to find out is to talk to the representative of the organisation. Typically, end of support services provided by the global services or the professional services organisations of the company. It's not provided by the core software support team, and that's why it can be quite expensive. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but the TPSM market is certainly very viable. In most cases, the TPSM vendors will support versions that are up to 15 years old. Right, I haven't really heard actually a limit on that, but that's a ballpark, right? And the last one there is a lack of price protection, which we hear about a lot. So, our clients are always worried about, well, what will happen when I come to the end of my 3-year ELA? Do I have price protection built in? Am I going to face an exponential increase in those already escalating prices? And it can be a worry. So if it is a worry, what you should be doing is exploring that and determining, well, what does my contract say? Am I protected? And if I'm not protected, start talking to the TPSM market about, well, what can they do for you at the end of that contract term? All right. So this is all great so far. I think I'm sold.
Yeah, sign me up.
But I'm in sales, so I would be. But there are risks, right? There are risks. And clearly what you're going to do with the vendors, the TPSM vendors, when you're talking to them is look to mitigate any perceived risks that the organization has. So the way I always look at risks is that they have to be discussed, they have to be explored, and you need to bring in additional stakeholders in the conversation to understand, well, what might the risks be and how can we mitigate those. But some of the top risks that are mentioned during the course of conversations and that also Gartner has obviously discovered in conversations is reinstatement fees. So reinstatement fees, it's another nasty one. It's a fee that you need to pay should, for any reason in the future, you decide to go back to the OEM vendor. Now, in my experience, I've never experienced nor ever heard of a client who's switched to TPSM actually switching back to the original manufacturer, the OEM, but you have to look at that risk, and you have to look at as part of the overall ROI modeling that you're going to do, the overall assessment of the feasibility of moving to a vendor. Is it a risk? How big is the risk? And what would the cost of it be if I had to face that? How do you know the cost of the reinstatement fees? Well, if you don't have access to the price book of the vendor, you've got to go and ask your rep, how much is the reinstatement fee for this product? It can be up to 2 to 3 times, but I've seen that negotiated, and I've also seen it advertised on different vendor websites that reinstatement fees are available today for 50% less than the normal price. So it's always for sale.
And also, on the same point, if you move your portfolio across to a TPSM, it might be just one product on that portfolio you need to move back. So it's one product line reinstatement.
That's a good point, yeah.
As opposed to the whole portfolio.
Absolutely, yeah. Very few organizations switch entirely. It's more likely the case when you're getting support for something like SAP that you actually have the entire stack supported by the vendors that are mentioned in the report. But with something like IBM, you can switch, one product. You don't have to switch all products. So you'll take a risk-based assessment of all the products that you're investigating, and this is just one of the then risks in relation to that particular product. So the risk can be mitigated. Another thing that scares people, we hear it all the time. It actually mentioned about audit defence. I think with Chris earlier that's one of his specialities, and so people are worried about well what if I find myself non-compliant? Am I more open to getting audited by my vendor if I switch to a third party? So this is obviously discussed as well by Gartner in the guide. I suppose that is a risk. In my view, it's always a risk. If you haven't yet been audited, you're going to be audited. If you've already been audited, you're going to be audited again. So audit is just a matter of, it's the fact of life at the moment, unfortunately, for our client organizations. But the best thing to do here to mitigate this risk is talk to your software asset manager. Talk to your software asset manager who will understand what are your entitlements to the software that you're paying support on against what you have deployed. They should match. A should meet equal B.
And a lot of these risks, like Brendan says, it is about talking to the stakeholders. It's not a one-person decision moving to TPSM. It's actually an organizational. So it's IT architects, it's IT procurement, it's IT asset managers, it's IT directors. Who will this decision impact, and actually who will add value to the negotiation and the risk and benefit assessment?
Yeah, and I mean, you should be talking to everybody. All of those individuals are key in the decision-making process. And so communication, obviously, is vital in terms of, bringing any new solution or a new vendor into a company. Another area that people kind of worry about as well, will I lose the right to use particular tools or, particular aspects of the product? So again, this depends on the product. You need to look at the T's and C's of the specific products in question. But for example, you may lose the right in certain circumstances to, SAP Solution Manager. It might be a tool that in particular you lose the right to use. Or in the case of IBM, there may be policy updates or new certificates that you can't then access for the continued running of the software. That's particularly related to security products. And for example, if you're using Traveller, which is part of the Lotus Domino suite, you may require certificate updates that you won't have access to once you move to a third party. But these are questions that actually the vendors, the TPSM vendors, can help you answer. But you also need to look at the T's and C's, okay, to understand what those rights are. All or nothing. I get asked this on a regular basis. So it's certainly in my top 3, and it's obviously in Gartner's top 5. So what does it mean? It may mean, depending on the vendor, that if you drop support for any particular product, the OEM vendor won't give you any support at all. So I think, particularly with the case of SAP, it generally requires a shift of the entire SAP stack to the TPSM. In the IBM world, for example, if you look at the schedule of products you have under support, any particular line item which is designated by a part number, happens to be an E-part number in IBM's world, you do not need to renew you can opt not to renew any particular line without impacting the rest of the schedule. Okay, what you can't do, and again I'll speak to IBM because this is something I'm more familiar with, is you can't say, for example, well, I've got 50,000 PVUs of MQ, well, I'll just renew 25,000 of those and I'll shift the other 25,000 on that line item to the third party. You can't do that. You'd have to pick the line item and say, I'm not going to renew part A, but I'm going to renew all the other parts. So the all or nothing rule depends on the vendor and depends on the product, but it means different things to different companies. But it's definitely something worth exploring. And again, the TPSM vendor will know all the rules of their particular area and can help you with that.
And that's the great thing about this market guide. It actually gives you the tools to ask these questions.
Exactly.
And you push it on to the TPSM. If they can't answer it, well, it's just not good enough, to be honest.
Yeah.
They should be able to answer all these so that when you decide to make a change, it's the right change in the long term as well. So you don't even have to worry about the reinstatement fees because you've done that analysis and checked it all off.
Yeah. And look, you're talking to, if it's reinstatement fees or non-compliance fees or the all or nothing rule, again, more than likely the software asset manager in your organization or the vendor manager, the category manager, if you're not that person already, will know the answer to these questions. Okay, so questions are easily addressed, and these are, now that I'm reading them out and talking about them, they're all pretty logical, but you may not think of them at the time. The other thing which, is I suppose less of a risk because it's probably less frequent is, well, what happens if there's a merger and acquisition? What happens if my organization is acquired by another organization? And one of our clients had that recent experience. They had switched products to ourselves here at Origina, and they themselves then, about 3 months later, were acquired by another much larger organization in their particular sector. To be honest, it was very easily managed, but you need to look at that. So ask your corporate guys internally, are there any mergers and acquisitions on the cards? Is this something that might happen? Is there a risk here in terms of if we get acquired that one part of the organization will be using a third party and another part of the organization won't? Why is it a risk? Well, the operations teams may not know where should I direct my question if some of our products are under a third party and others aren't. But I think that's easily addressed through just strict operational controls. But it's still a risk and it needs to be looked at. So keep the questions coming in, folks. So because we're nearly there and we'd like to answer some of your great questions at the end. So what are the next steps? Well, the next steps really are, if you're on this call and you haven't looked at the TPSM market, or if you're already looking at the TPSM market and you haven't navigated your way through that, is look at the viability of this for your organization. So, think back to an earlier slide that we talked about the different scenarios. Is your organization going through any of those particular scenarios? Are you migrating away from the OEM products? Are you migrating away partially or wholly? If you're doing a cloud migration, is looking at TPM a viable option? So look at it from a technical perspective and also a commercial perspective. Evaluate the services. So this kind of speaks for itself. You need to speak to the TPSM vendors from the guide. I think Gartner have captured all of the main ones. I don't know of any others myself. But talk to them, understand the services, understand what they offer, compare that against what you're getting from your current OEM providers, determine what's included and excluded from the services, what are their SLAs, what is the additional value that they will bring. So evaluate the services, look for value for money, against what they'll charge and against what you're being charged by the OEM vendors.
And all of these CPMs will actually do a cost savings analysis, which will detail what you're currently spending versus how much you can save and what level of service you can expect. So it's a great starting point, especially when you're trying to get other stakeholders on board. It's actually an easier discussion when you have tangible information as opposed to talking about it theoretically. Yeah,
and there are vendor guided assessments programs they'll bring you through at no cost, like a feasibility assessment, for example, which will assess those things. That's typically done over a 3 to 5 year period. So they'll look at, well, what would this look like, over 1, 3, and 5 years? Again, both from a technical and a commercial perspective. So examining that bullet point 3 is a nice tie-in to, well, what does the 3-year plan look like for the products? What does the plan look like, commercially? And you bring all of that information then to the internal stakeholders for buy-in and approval. So once you've got that, once you've kind of looked at the services, examined the ROI, looked at that over a 1 to 3 year, 5 year period, the next thing you'll want to do is look for references. So is the TPSM vendor referenceable? They all are. They'll all provide you with references, and so of course the thing you want to do then is go and speak to those references, have a call, and ask them how are they, why do they choose the vendor? What has their experience been to date? Have they done everything that they said they would do in their brochureware? What else might they recommend in terms of evaluating the TPSM vendor? So definitely talk to your peers in other organizations, either formally or informally. You might meet them at a show, or you might want the TPSM vendor to set up a call for you.
Also, another hint or trick as well. A lot of these TPSMs will actually have client logos on their website. If you don't want to set it up formally to the TPSM, if you know someone in that organization, pick up the phone.
Yeah, absolutely. No harm in doing that. And this might be a restricted practice in the OEM vendors, but the TPSM market is, because of what we do, it's a very transparent and open market, so we've no problem with our clients or prospective clients talking to one another. We actually encourage that. You also might find videos on the websites. There's videos on everybody's website, typically of client references. So you don't want to go and have the call if that's not your thing. Just listen to what vendors, clients are saying on their websites. And then the final thing, where possible, depends on the product, how practical this is, but conduct a test or a pilot. So this can be anything from simply give the TPSM a sample ticket that you've already logged with your OEM vendor and ask them to bring you through the journey of how they would address the ticket. So the TPSM vendor will have, a process through which they examine the ticket, discuss the ticket with you, to try and determine the root cause of the problem and give you a diagnosis and a solution. So experience that journey. What does it look like? And that can be done quite simply through, as I said, a ticket, or you might want a longer duration process where you move over a single product, maybe in parallel with that product being supported by the OEM vendor, and see what that experience looks like over a longer journey. So talk to your TPSM vendor about the possibility of doing that. Again, it depends on the product, how practical that is, but the TPSM vendors are typically quite open to showing you how they do things. So that's it. They're the next steps, Sinead.
So then it just ties into recommendations.
Yeah, so I mean recommendations. Therefore, in terms of kind of summary, evaluate the market, evaluate the savings. Don't neglect the opportunity to look for savings in the organisation. Okay, and this isn't just me saying this. This is what the analysts say. This is what Gartner says. Look at the costs. There is no cost involved in investigating the opportunity to save money. Okay, there is no cost, and in fact, having investigated the savings and actually delivered the savings, there's actually reduced costs because you've saved money. But there's no cost in the process other than your own time. Identify the candidates. If you want to identify the candidates, Gartner clients can look up the guide. They can download it from the Gartner website. You can call Chris, Joanne, or Rob. I'm sure they'd help you direct to the guide. Many people that can help you in the organisation, or attend a Gartner conference and identify who the vendors are from that. So identify the candidates and read about them in the guide, and then perform, as I said, that feasibility assessment, determine if it's suitable for your organisation, and undertake those risk assessment exercises. This is all part of kind of standard due diligence. And then ensure that the providers demonstrate that they can do what they say they can do, either through reading their material, asking them questions about the information and material, or, as I said, conduct a POC. So it's all pretty straightforward in terms of recommendations and next steps. So I hope we have some questions. I'm sure we do.
We have 3 so far, actually. So that pretty much just summarises kind of what the market guide is about, but also what we're seeing in the market. I'd highly recommend people to actually check out the market guide. It is amazing. I'm actually just going to run a really quick poll, and then I'm going to go straight into the questions and answers. So it's only going to be up for a minute. So it's just, are you considering third-party support? So just click yes, no, and this is just going to be open for another 60 seconds. So while this is happening, what I'm going to do is go to the first question. So you mentioned software updates. Can you expand on what my entitlements are to software updates if you move to a third party?
All right. Yeah, good one. I can take that, Sinead. Yeah. So this falls into the area of, I suppose, examining the feasibility and also looking at risk. It kind of ties into both of those areas. So you're asking, what are my entitlements to software updates if you move to third party? Right. So, well, your entitlement to you're entitled, when you move to a third party, you're entitled to the latest version of the software that was available at the time that you made that switch. So, for example, if you're on a particular version of software now from any of the vendors and you're thinking of switching to a third party on the 1st of January 2020, well, whatever version of the software that you're on that you're thinking of switching is available as of the 31st of the 12th or 12/31 for our US friends, 2019. You're always entitled to deploy that version after the SNS date. The only catch is you need to download the software prior to the cancellation of your support. You can't download the software after the end of December in that example, but you can upgrade at any time in the future once you've done that. I hope that answers that question.
Great. And okay, so I'm going to close the poll. It's great. It's 80% say yes, they are considering, 20% saying no. But it's always great to have this information on hand because you never know when it comes into add
But
value.
it's the 80-20 rule, right? So
there you go. So another question that's popped up is, are there any other TPSMs not on the list?
Personally, I don't know of any. As you saw, there's no TPSM for Microsoft right now, so that's one standout omission. Not omission, but there's a gap in the market potentially for somebody to address. I know there are companies out there that may do consulting services for certain products, configuration services, but they're not really support providers. They won't answer the phone at 4 a.m. in the morning and start diagnosing a problem. But I think Gartner has captured all the ones that I'm aware of. I don't know of any others.
Perfect. All righty. And then can you forward on Gartner report after the webinar? Unfortunately not. Unless you're a Gartner client, you have to get access to the report if you're a Gartner client. But if you're interested in getting access to the report, please let me know and I'll put you in contact with our Gartner account manager and he can get in touch. I would highly recommend reviewing the full report. It is the how-to guide and how to navigate it. So, but what we will do is, after this, we will forward on this presentation and a video of this webinar. So if you feel like there's anyone in your organization that could benefit from this webinar, more than happy, just forward it on. Great. Okay, so, we've got another question. Can you share more info on the second-hand licensing market? This one's for Brendan.
Yeah, I can. I'm happy to just give you a bit of information now on the webinar, and if you want to send me email, I can send you on the names of the companies. But there's a number of companies out there that do second-hand licensing. It's really predominantly in the European market due to the licensing and IP laws in Europe. But there are some companies out there. I don't want to mention any specific ones because that would be unfair if I don't mention them all. But it's predominantly related to Microsoft. It's predominantly related to user licenses of Microsoft. But if whoever posted the question wants to send me an email, I'll give you the names and contact numbers of the ones that we're most familiar with. I just don't want to pick on any particular one because I don't want to leave anybody out. But it certainly can help if you send me your email.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we have your details, so we'll send it on after the webinar. So I think that is perfect. That's covered everything off, and I think we've covered off all the questions. No one else has any more questions, but if you do want additional information or you want to get in touch with the Gartner account manager, please contact myself. It is the person that sent out the webinar reminders, Sinéad Geraghty, and it is s.geraghty@origina.com. And look at this, we got another one, another question just come in, so we'll answer this. How is patches and security handled in TPM, given that they don't have access to latest patches in TPM? So that's the first question.
Right.
We'll get to the second one in a second.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and we get answer that all the time. So, the strict letter of the law is you're not entitled to any software from the OEM vendors as soon as you do not renew or cancel your support with the vendor. However, the TPSM market have themselves security solutions in relation to the software that they support. So if you talk to them specifically about how they do that, the different vendors have different methodologies, but ultimately it becomes the responsibility of the TPSM to help you address any real security and vulnerability issues. So again, it depends. The relevancy of the question depends on the product that you're using, whereabouts in the organization is it deployed, is it behind the firewall, is it itself an end of support version and not getting patched by the OEM in any case. So the relevancy of the question, the criticality of the question depends on the product, the version, and the answer depends on the vendor you're talking to. And
to be honest, this is where it ties into that, what Brendan called a feasibility assessment. That's what we call it here in Origina. The cost savings analysis the TPSM will do. They'll do a line-by-line item and say what they can cover and the risks that will be involved. And that's why that probably should be the first port of call, because that will answer a lot of questions, but that will kick off that risk assessment. And again, like Brendan said, it really depends on a lot of things. So that would be the first protocol. So the second question on that one is, what are some of the key concerns or pushback the typical IT SME has when they consider TPM?
Yeah, so this is great. These are great questions, and these questions need to be addressed, obviously, as part of the assessment of the TPSM market. So typical things might be, we want to be on the latest version. We always want to be on the latest version of the product that we're supporting. So that may be very well true. It may be that you're staying current all the time, but you need to take that question and look at it more deeply and really look at, well, what version are we actually deployed on? I often hear, we want to be on the latest version, and when I ask what version the client is using, it could be up to 6 years or plus old, and therefore the tenet of keeping up with the latest version isn't holding true. The other thing that you might get is, what am I losing by going to the TPSM? And so in order to adjudicate that, you need to look at, well, what value is the TPSM bringing in terms of the service, the enhanced SLAs, their availability 24/7 to address issues, the additional consulting they'll give you as part of the service. So all of the things that are wrapped up into their offering. But the questions can be, what am I losing? Because if they haven't heard what the vendor has to say, then they're going to be asking questions without knowing what the service is. So what I would recommend for somebody who's evaluating the service is to make sure that the IT SMEs have spoken to the provider. Understand how does support work. Most vendors have a presentation that they'll give you which describes how does support work, and they'll be able to answer the top 5 or 6 questions that they get every day of the week from the IT SMEs. So it's hard to predict what the questions are. The top 2 are probably the ones I mentioned, but
another one is, one of the other pushbacks is actually the internal people in the organization. You've bought into it, you think it's great, you bring it to someone else, and just because they haven't been brought in along the journey, and I think people's innate reaction to change is probably no. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of stakeholder management involved. So it's, like we mentioned earlier, it's not as easy as, yes, we'll make the switch. Who will the switch affect? What are their worries, and how do you address them, and making sure it's the right fit? So you could have all the right answers, but someone in your organization is saying, nah, we're okay.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's why talking to the vendors, giving the IT SMEs access to the vendors so they can ask their questions is vital. And the vendors won't just have the sales guy on the phone. They'll bring on their corresponding technical experts who'll be able to, have a good conversation with them. So I hope that answered the question. Whoever posted it, let me know if it did, or else I'll have to improve my answers.
Okay, great, guys. So really actually enjoyed this webinar, and the questions you asked were great questions. After this webinar, we'll send on the video of the webinar, a copy of the presentation, and also a link to the market guide. From that email, you can always reply to me and say if you want the contact within Gartner to access it if you don't have access. But thank you very much for coming on
very
today.
Enjoyable. And it's very enjoyable working with you, Sinead, I think this is our first webinar together.
It is.
So, hopefully it was okay. And
I might do it again
and
sometime.
it's the first time we've had to talk about the TPSM guide. So looking forward to doing this again. Maybe we might do it in French the next time for our French clients.
All right, thank you, guys.